I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we're going to unpack one of the most fascinating paradoxes in American history. We're looking at a guy who is relatively obscure today, honestly, a man most people would probably struggle to pick out of a police lineup, but who almost single-handedly reshaped the entire continent. We are talking about James K. Polk, the Dark Horse President, and the very undeniable heavy price of manifest destiny.
So let me ask you a question right off the bat. Who added 500,000 square miles to the U.S. map? When we think about massive territorial expansion, our minds usually jump straight to Thomas Jefferson and the Louisiana Purchase, right? Or maybe the early explorers. But the sheer volume of land we're talking about today was actually secured in a single 4-year presidential term by a guy who wasn't even supposed to be his party's nominee.
Yeah, 500,000 square miles. Just let the staggering scale of that number sink in for a second. That's not just drawing a new line on a map. That is fundamentally altering the physical, political, and cultural landscape of an entire nation. And the architect behind all this incredible expansion was the 11th President of the United States, James K. Polk. Section 1. Roots of Young Hickory. Okay, let's dive into this. To really grasp Polk's worldview, we have to look at his roots in North Carolina and those formative years he spent in Tennessee. His upbringing wasn't just a backdrop, it was literally the blueprint for his entire life. Born in Pineville, North Carolina in 1795, his family soon moved west, settling just south of Nashville to find prosperity, and they definitely found it. His father, Samuel Polk, became a huge community leader and judge. But we have to note, that wealth was deeply tied to the institution of slavery. When Samuel died in 1827, he left his family 8,000 acres of land and 53 enslaved people. So James K. Polk was completely shaped by this western frontier, and his constant daily interactions with enslaved individuals framed his attitudes towards slavery and westward expansion from day one. But, Polk was a pretty complex figure, even as a kid. On one hand, you had a physically frail child. Yet on the other, you had this immense intellectual rigor. He simply didn't let physical limitations hold him back. The guy was incredibly studious, highly intelligent, and that drive led him to graduate from the University of North Carolina in 1818. After that, he heads back to Nashville, studies law, and jumps right into the political arena as the clerk of the Tennessee State Senate. He was building this razor-sharp legal and political mind.
And he absolutely didn't do it alone. In 1824, he married Sarah Childress. Now, Sarah wasn't just your standard political spouse. She came from a highly regarded Tennessee family and was exceptionally well educated. The source material specifically points out that she frequently assisted her husband with speechwriting and provided vital policy advice throughout his entire career. They were this formidable political team, and even though they didn't have children of their own, they raised a nephew instead, they were entirely laser-focused on Polk's political ascent.
Section 2. Profiting from the frontier. So Polk's rise in the political ranks was insanely fast, and it ran right on parallel tracks with his intensely ambitious pursuit of personal wealth. Elected to the Tennessee House in 1823, he aligned himself so closely with General Andrew Jackson, famous as Old Hickory, that Polk earned the nickname Young Hickory. By 1825, he's in the U.S. House of Representatives. Fast forward to 1835, and he is the Speaker of the House. And as Speaker, he definitely didn't shy away from controversy. He used his authority to strictly enforce a gag rule that completely barred any discussion of slavery in Congress. From there, he runs for governor of Tennessee in 1839 and wins. He was climbing the ladder incredibly fast. But here's the thing. While his political power grew, so did his financial ambitions. And the source material connects these dots very, very clearly. In 1830, Congress passed the Indian Removal Act, signed by his mentor, Andrew Jackson. This policy led to the tragic forced relocation of the Choctaw Nation from northern Mississippi, which was part of the Trail of Tears. Polk, operating as an absentee planter, wanting to increase his moderate profits, jumped into the rush of speculators. He sold off his Tennessee property and bought this newly vacated land down in Yalobusha County, Mississippi. There, enslaved workers harvested cotton for his personal profit. So you can draw a stark, direct line from a tragic national policy right to Polk's own personal wealth generation.
Section 3. The Dark Horse President.
Understanding all that ambition sets the stage perfectly for the chaotic election of 1844. This is where Polk's trajectory takes a massive, totally unexpected leap into history. Heading into the 1844 Democratic Convention, Polk was literally just hoping to become vice president.
He fully expected former President Martin Van Buren to get the top ticket. But in this huge twist of fate, the convention deadlocked. Polk emerges as the compromise, the surprise dark horse candidate. And he actually goes on to defeat the Whig candidate Henry Clay, becoming the 11th president. But why him? What was the spark? Well, it all boiled down to one core ideology: manifest destiny. Polk was chosen precisely because of his unwavering, hardcore support for expanding the United States' territorial holdings across the continent. This wasn't just some catchy campaign slogan, it was a deeply held conviction that drove his entire platform. And as we're about to see, the second he took the oath of office in 1845, he wasted absolutely zero time putting it into action.
Section 4, Manifest Destiny and War.
Polk was a man of action, for sure. He immediately used aggressive diplomacy and military force to start painting the map. The crucial point here is how tactical he was right out of the gate. First, he successfully negotiates the Canadian boundary at the 49th parallel with Great Britain, locking down the north. Then he navigates the massive 1845 annexation of Texas. But he wanted more. Specifically, he had his eyes on New Mexico and California. So in 1846, he secretly sends American diplomat John Slidell to Mexico to offer up to $30 million for those territories and to settle some Texas boundary disputes while he was at it.
Mexico, however, flat out turns Slidell away, and this is exactly where Polk's aggressive strategy fully materializes. When the Mexican government refused the offer, President Polk didn't just back down. Nope. He ordered American troops commanded by General Zachary Taylor to move directly into and occupy the disputed territory. And according to the source material, this strategic, highly controversial move intentionally incited the 2-year Mexican-American War.
Section 5. A complicated, sudden end. That war eventually concluded with a complete American victory, bringing us to a complicated and, frankly, sudden end to Polk's story, an end filled with stark contrasts that still echo today. What you really should take away from this explainer is the permanent physical legacy of that conflict. The United States acquired over 500,000 square miles of Mexico's land holdings. We're talking about present-day California, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. In a single presidential term, James K. Polk essentially completed the map of the contiguous United States, from ocean to ocean. It is a breathtaking geographic accomplishment. But right alongside that massive public triumph is a somber reality rooted in his personal life. As president, Polk very publicly supported the expansion of slavery into these newly acquired territories. But privately, his actions went even further. While serving as the leader of the nation, the source data reveals that Polk made secret purchases of 13 enslaved children through an agent. These children were then sent far away to work on his Mississippi plantation. And the institution of slavery wasn't just kept at a distance on his plantation, it was present right there in the executive mansion. During his term, President Polk actually employed enslaved individuals at the White House, including men named Henry Carter Jr. and Elias Polk. It's a pretty striking reminder of how deeply intertwined the nation's highest office was with the reality of human bondage during this specific era. Now, Polk had promised the voters he'd only serve one term, and to his credit, he kept that promise. He retired, hoping to enjoy a comfortable existence at his Nashville home, which was appropriately named Polk Place. But that retirement was incredibly brief. On June 15, 1849, less than 4 months after leaving office and handing over the presidency, the 53-year-old former president suddenly succumbed to a cholera outbreak in Nashville. Which kind of leaves us with this final provocative thought. Can a legacy of massive national expansion ever truly be separated from the human cost used to achieve it? James K. Polk was the dark horse who fulfilled the dream of manifest destiny, literally stretching the United States from sea to shining sea. Yet, his story is inextricably linked to war, the displacement of indigenous nations, and the expansion of slavery for both personal and national gain. It's a deeply gray area of American history, and understanding his single map-changing term really forces us to look closely at the true price of that destiny. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it encourages you to keep digging into these fascinating, complex layers of the past.